All right, well, Casey here with CL Creative. I'm teaching you Webflow and web design one video at a time here on YouTube. And today we're going to build out a two-column section in Webflow, and it's going to be the hero section. And there's a few different things that we're going to talk about as we go into this build. We're going to look at position absolute, as well as we're going to talk about how do we make this design responsive. And the design that I'm talking about is this design right here that you see on the screen. I got this from Untitled UI, and we're going to rebuild this here from scratch. And so let's jump into the computer and let's check that out. All right, well, here we are in the computer, and again, this is the section that we're going to be rebuilding today together. One of the things that I want to say first is if you do not have the Untitled UI, kit in your library, in your workspace, then you should go and add that to your workspace. Super powerful, lots of different ideas and sections for you to utilize in your builds. But today, we're not just going to utilize what they have built, we're actually going to rebuild that, because I think that this shows us a lot of different things that we can do with Webflow and will help us to learn how to build a two-column layout and add a little bit of a twist to that. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to understand is how is the web created, and what I mean by that is not like how everything is interconnected, but how's a website built, and really a website is built on the box model. And if you just see here on the screen, I have an outline, and this outline is forming a rectangle. And as I move my mouse around the screen, you notice that there are a lot of other rectangles, and these rectangles are essentially boxes, and each of these boxes is what we are actually utilizing to put our content inside of, and we are laying those boxes out on the screen in many different ways so that they form the designs that we want. And so here, let me just jump in so you see this. And now as we go through this, I'm going to use some different commands, shortcut commands, just to make life a lot easier. And the command that I'm going to use over and over again today is Command E. Command E brings up the search bar within Webflow. Super powerful, super useful. If you're not using it, you should definitely be doing so. It will save you a ton of time. And I'm just going to type in div block. Now, I could type in section, but a section is just a div block. And so just to keep things super easy and super simple, I'm just going to type in div block, and I'm going to press enter. Now, it goes down to the bottom. We want to bring it back up here because, again, this is going to be our reference for our project today. The first thing that we see is it puts a box on the screen. Now, this box has no height or width to it. If we were to do this, you would notice that it takes up no space, and that's because we have put nothing inside of it. Now, inside Webflow, it shows up this way so that we would know that, hey, there is a box there that we can put something inside of. And one of the things that we need to do to get things set up is set up our structure for our section. Now, I use FinSuite's client-first system, and so that's how we're going to walk through this project and any other builds that you see here on my YouTube channel. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to entitle this section YouTube, because this is what I am. We'll just do YT, so I don't have to keep typing it over and over. Section YT hero header. And this is exactly what we're going to be building. So this is our section. Now, inside of this section, we need to add 3 more div blocks, and they're going to be nested inside of one another. So as you see, I'm just nesting these inside of one another. And the first one that we're going to do is we're going to add in our page padding, or as it is in the client-first system, padding global. This is giving me 2.5 rem on either side so that everything will be lined up nicely, not against the side of the screen, but there will be a 2.5 rem buffer, if you will, or padding is what we refer to it here in web design. And then next, we're going to put in our container. And I use what's called a container large. Essentially, all that is doing is providing a max width of 75 rem, meaning that the content inside of this container cannot grow to be any more than 75 rem. And it is also centered, and it is taking up 100% of the space. The next thing that we're going to do inside of this is we're going to put some margin or some padding for the top. So, excuse me, I should be over here in our style selector. Section padding. And we're going to use section padding large. And all this is doing is adding 3 rem to the top and 3 rem to the bottom of padding so that there's some space in between these sections, as well as, you know, it's giving us a little bit of breathing room here, if you will. Okay, inside of this, so that's our main structure. This is how most every one of the layouts are going to be set up as far as sections go. The next thing that we need to do is we need to put a component on the page, and this component is really going to control the layout. Again, a component is just a div, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to put in a div. And you could go ahead, if you wanted to, you could, since we're going to use grid, you could have just put grid on the screen, but that is really just nothing fancy. It's nothing different than a standard div. All it does is have the grid layout automatically applied to it. But we can go ahead and apply that over here in the display layout section. So we're going to go ahead and apply grid. And the one thing that we are going to do, because we just want a 2-column layout, is remove the second row. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that second row. Now, with inside of this, we need to, or first before we do that, we need to make sure that we are naming things correctly. So again, YT hero header component. And this is going to be spelled component wrong, but this is going to be our component. This is what we're going to put all of these different pieces into. Now, as far as grid goes, you can continue to put things inside of the grid, and it's just going to build out more and more aspects of that particular grid. And so I got the heading in here, and you know, looking at our design, it looks like, you know, we also need a paragraph, and oops, I forgot Command E. It also looks like we need some buttons, you know, in this. But as you notice, it's not putting the layout like we want it to, and that's because the grid, each portion of the grid is acting like a container, and it is, you know, these pieces are going inside of that grid. Now, what we want to do is we want to combine all of these pieces that I've put on the screen so far. We want a header, we want a paragraph, we want our buttons, we want all of these things on the left side. And so in order to get that, what we actually have to do inside of our component here, which again is just our grid, we need to put another container, or what I refer to as a wrapper. And so we're going to, again, put another div in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull this div all the way up to the top. And by doing that, if you look at this, we've created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, well, 5, you know, elements in our grid, if you will. And we have our div block in this first, which is where we want all these other pieces to be as well. So we have put this here. You can see that in the structure over here in the navigator. What we need to do is we need to take all of these elements, the heading, the paragraph, and both of the buttons, and we need to put them inside of this div block. And so we can just drag that right inside of the div block. Great. We want to make sure that we name this as well. So this is going to be YT hero header content. This is going to be on the left, and we're going to call that wrapper. All right, so we have our naming going. We have all of our pieces, and you notice they're all on the left side, but they are not structured properly, nor do we really have the content. So just to make things easy, I'm going to pop into this top. I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to paste that right there, as well as I'm going to do the same thing for this particular content so that you don't have to watch me type that out. The next thing that we need to do is we need to space these things out, as well as we need to do something with the buttons, because the buttons are not, looking all that great in this particular instance. So we can put another div on the page, and we're putting the div inside of our left wrapper. And if you notice, you have your heading as well as your paragraph. There's some space in between those, but then they're also spaced out from the buttons. And in order to do that, we want to create 2 more divs on the page. And we're going to put our heading and paragraph in one of those divs. We're going to put our 2 buttons in the other div, and I'll talk about one of the reasons why we're putting both buttons in a div by itself here in just a minute, other than just spacing these things out vertically. Again, we want to make sure that we name this YT hero header content wrapper, and then we're going to name this one right here. All right, so we have both of those named. If I go ahead and collapse these on the left side, you see that they are inside of this main content left wrapper inside of the hero. And one of the things that I can do here to space these out so they start looking a little bit more similar to these pieces up here is I can go click on that, and we're using grid for our main layout, but one of the other display layout properties that we have that we can utilize, which is super powerful, is Flexbox. And so I'm going to click on Flexbox. Now Flexbox default behavior is horizontal. We don't want it horizontal. We want these things stacked on front of one another, so we're going to change the direction to vertical. Perfect. Now these things are exactly how we want, but they're still pretty smushed together. We can utilize gap, and I utilize this all the time. And so I'm going to put 1 rim of gap, and really what that has done, if you notice that the buttons move down a little bit, actually want a little bit more room there, so I'm going to put 2 rim of gap. So now what we have is we have some gap between this top wrapper, content wrapper, and this bottom button wrapper. We still need some space in between these because there's space in between these right here. The other same thing we can do is we can utilize Flexbox. So Flexbox, again, vertical, and we're going to put a gap. This time our gap may be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to use 1 rim for my gap. Now, as we're looking at this, we see that this heading is 3.75 rim. This heading is 3.75 rim. Great, we're good to go. But we're going to have to change some properties on here. Particularly, we're going to change the text size property. So one of the things that we want to do is go ahead and name this. All right, so we have those named, and we'll be able to set some size properties on those. I'm going to go ahead and set the size property on my paragraph so that it's pretty close to the size that we have up here. And what we need to do with our buttons is we need to make our buttons look a lot more similar to these particular buttons here. Now, there's a little bit more happening within these buttons that we're not going to get into. I'm just trying to show you the layout, but just to save time, I've put a button on the page. And what we can do is we can just put a class of button on that. Now I already have this class built into my particular website, a class of button. So that's why you see that it changes color and size there. But we want this button to be a different color. We want this button to be white. And so what I'm going to do to my normal button is I'm going to give this a combo class of is_YT demo. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to change the color of this without changing the actual button class on the website, so that everything stays very consistent and very much the same. Now on this other one over here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to apply a class of button. Then I'm going to give this a combo class as well, we'll just say is sign up. And we're going to change the background on this particular button from this color that I already have applied to that, and the background is more of a purpley color. So we're going to select a purpley color, and that's all we need to do there. We need to change the text inside of this, which will be sign up. And we're going to change the text inside of this one right here to demo. Now, if you notice, these two buttons are close to one another so that there's not space like there is up here, as well as we can't really see the buttons. And so the reason we can't see the buttons is because we don't have a different background color like they have on theirs. One of the places to apply a background is to the actual section, the main section right here. And so that's exactly what I'm going to go ahead and do as well. Now, you could throw another div underneath here before you get to the padding global and put some color on that, but I'm going to go ahead just for our sake today and apply the background. So we go down to the background portion of our CSS panel over here, and we click on color. We're going to change that from transparent to more of a lighter gray color. Now, I already have all of these color swatches built into my website, but you may not have that, and so you can fool around with this, or you can paste the hex code in from, say, a Figma file or something like that, and then you can use this plus action down here to actually rename the button or rename the color to whatever it is that you want that color to be in your website. Now, I already have a name for that, so I'm not going to do that. All right. So we have a light gray section here that's pretty similar to the section up there, but our buttons are still close together. So one of the things that we can do again is use our layout display property of flex. And again, the normal direction is horizontal, which is exactly what we want, but we want to apply a gap here. And so we're going to put a gap of 1 rem, and we notice that those buttons have spaced out from one another. Okay, so for right now, we have our left section built. Now we need to build the right section. So we'll go ahead and close down these two items over here, and we'll go back to our main heading component, which is where we have our layout of grid on, and we're going to put another div so that we can begin to put content in this right side without it creating more grid items. So we'll click on our heading component. We'll mash Command E. We'll type grid. We'll type div. Now we have our div. We're going to name that YT hero header. And we'll just keep it consistent like we did for the other one. Content right, and this is going to be our wrapper. All right, so we have that. Now inside of this, we need to put several things. You notice that we have a big image, we have some other images here, and we have this kind of design feature, but it's all images essentially. So we're going to click on our wrapper, make sure that that's what we have clicked on, Command E. We're going to put in an image. Then we're going to put in another image. Well, first let me not do that. Let's just put in our first image, which will be this background portion here first. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and name this YT hero header, and we're just going to simply call this one image. Now I already have these images in place, so we're going to click on this gear icon. We're going to click choose image, and we're going to go over here and we're going to grab our image. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice is that this image looks nothing like this image. I mean, there's the same people are in this image, but the image does not have the same design, if you will, right? The same properties or size properties are not applied to that. So what we need to do is we need to apply some size properties to this particular image. The first thing that we want to do is we want to change the height of the image so that it will be a similar height to this image right here. So we're going to go ahead and put 40 rem on the height. Now when I did that, it's similar in height to that image up above, but it does not look good at all. If you put this on your website, people are going to think you're an amateur, and they're probably not going to hire you for web design or web development. Luckily, we have different fit properties, and this one is set to fill, meaning that this image is filling that whole height property there. We want to set this to cover. So what cover is going to do is it's actually going to crop that image a bit on the sides. It's going to keep it same aspect ratio, and it's going to put it so that it doesn't look stretched or distorted. Portions of the image will be hidden, which is exactly what we want to take place. And we'll go ahead and add 100% width to the image as well, so that it's always going to be 100% of its parent div block here, its parent wrapper. Now, the one thing that we see on this image is there's a curve on the left, so we need to create a curve. And we can do that easily down here in the borders section. And we're not going to utilize the one that is affecting all borders, but we're actually going to click on the second one that's not checked by default. It's called the individual corners. We're going to click on that, and what we want to affect is this top left corner. So we will click inside of the top left corner. We're going to click 10 rem just to get started, and that looks, pretty close to where we were at. Maybe we can go to 11 or 12, but you can play around with that, and we have our nice corner on the top left. So we're starting to move in the right direction here. The next thing that we need, now immediately as I made this image bigger or taller, you notice that this text is not center aligned like it is in our demo versions. So we can easily fix that. We can click back over on our YT Hero header content left wrapper, and we already have our display flex on there. And one of the things that we can do is justify that not to the top, but we're going to justify that to the center. And so that really takes care of that look. So everything is centered up. One of the things that we need to also do to leave room for these podcast images is we need to create a gap in between our image here and our image on the left. So you notice that my gap is not as great as theirs. And the way that you do that is to click, you hover back over the main component where you get the grid. You're going to click on the grid where it says Edit Grid, and you're going to notice that this gap right here is pretty small right now, and we can look over here in our panel that opens up, and we can see indeed it's just 16 pixels. Now we want to increase this gap, so maybe we'll increase this gap to 4 rem, which is going to be 4 times 16, and that's what we're going to end up with right here. So that gives us a decent sized gap, so we'll exit out of that. Now what we need to do is we need to think about how are we going to put these 2 images. This is actually 2 images, and this is 1 image. So we have 3 images that we need to put on the screen, and what we're going to utilize is position absolute to do that. Now in order to utilize position absolute, we need to make sure that our main wrapper, that those absolute positions are in, is actually in position relative, so that it will continue to hold those absolute elements. So here we are, we've changed that to position relative as we were preparing for the other images that are going to be inside of this. So we're going to go ahead and drop in a couple more images. Great. Now we're going to go over here, and I've already got, some of those loaded up. So we'll grab a couple of images from over here, and we will go ahead and grab our design as well. Now, obviously, that is not what we want to take place. So we need to start placing these on the canvas in the place that we want to do that. So we're going to click on this, and we're going to say YT Hero header. We're just going to call it design, and we're going to make this position absolute. You notice it pops up here, and we will choose the right corner so that now it is within this main wrapper box in the right corner. Now, if you notice that this is positioned a little bit outside of that right corner, so we want to do the same. We're still clicked on that. We're going to use these properties right here We're going to move to the right a little bit, and then we're going to move this top one, top position up, just a bit as well. We want to stay within our section. So now we are looking pretty similar to the section above us. The next thing that we need to do is we need to take these other images and we need to kind of work with those and make sure that they're going to show up right here. But they're pretty large. They're not the size that we want them to be. And one way that we can manipulate the size of those and as well as keep these together easily is by wrapping those in a div block as well. So we're going to put a div block again within our content right wrapper. We're going to name this div block YT Hero Header Podcast. Wrapper. All right, great. We have that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a max width to this so that we are able to control the size. So we'll use max width, and we're going to set a max width of, say, 20 rem. We'll see where that gets us. That gets us pretty close in size to these up here. Maybe we could extend that out just a little bit more. Again, they're not in the right position, nor are they spaced out. So if you remember earlier, one of the things that we utilized was Flexbox in order to space out items within its wrapper. So we're going to do the same here. Click Flexbox. Again, the standard direction is horizontal, so we're going to go vertical, and we're going to give this a gap of, say, 1.5 rem to see how that looks. Maybe we can decrease that just down to 1 rem. All right, so we have these spaced how we need them to be spaced, but they're not in the right position. So the next thing that we're going to do, just like we did with our design here, is we're going to change this to position absolute. After we change it to position absolute, we're going to click the left, bottom left position here, which puts it right here on our image. And we're going to utilize our controls to move that down, or move that over to the left some, as well as move that up just a bit. All right, so at this point, both of these are looking pretty similar. I'm sure there's some things that we can continue to tweak, but I'm not going to bore you on the video in doing those. But the next thing that we need to really think about is how do we make this responsive? This is on desktop. It looks great, but we need this to also work for us on iPad and mobile. So the next thing that we need to do is click on iPad, and we need to see how ours looks. So this is what theirs looks like. How does ours look? It's not looking great at all. It's super easy to fix, though. We're going to click on our main component. We're going to click on the grid, and actually we're just going to delete one of these columns. And when we delete this column, it is going to stack our grid so that our header is on the top. Now, if you notice there's quite a bit of gap here, we may not want that much gap. So we can go back over here to our grid and say we do 2 rem. That looks okay. We'll go with that for now. And we're going to look at this. Now, this is off the screen. This is kind of off the screen. And we're getting some horizontal scroll here. We can get rid of that horizontal scroll by going to the section up here. And we're going to apply overflow hidden. Now, we don't have the horizontal scroll anymore, but our podcast items are off the screen. That does not look great, but all we need to do is click back on the wrapper, go to our position property, and just move those over to the left some. And if we go back up to the top, we see that indeed theirs are moved over to the left, and we kind of line it up about the same as theirs. So great. Now we've got our iPad looking good. What about mobile landscape? Mobile landscape is not too bad either, but one of the things that we notice is that their image is not as tall as our image, and their buttons are beginning to look a little bit different than our buttons are as well. Well, we can take care of that. We're going to click back on the image. If you remember, in order to make it the same size, we gave it a height of 40, so we can just decrease that height. And maybe we go down to, maybe we go down to like 28 rem. That looks about right. Maybe a little bit less, so that we're starting to get a bit more of the top there. One of the things, though, that we're going to notice on theirs is when they started moving down, they decided, hey, this podcast deal is getting in the way, and truthfully, it is getting in the way. We could go over here and change the max width, so maybe that's down to like 12, but then it's kind of like, well, what is that even doing there? So all you need to do is you're on our mobile version here, and you can just go up here and hide this on mobile. So on our layout properties, we go to display, we go over here to the right, none hides this element. Now it's only hiding it on mobile, landscape, and below, because it's cascading downward. So all of the different CSS properties that we're putting on here are cascading downward through the breakpoints. If we click back up here to iPad, these are still there. But if we go ahead and click down into mobile, those are no longer there anymore. So something to keep in mind. Now, we could bring that back on mobile if we wanted to, but if we're going to get rid of it on mobile landscape, we don't want to keep it on just the vertical mobile side. So what we need to do also is change these buttons. So again, we can click back on our buttons. We can utilize our layout direction and flex and say vertical. Now they are going all the way across because we have our alignment going all the way across here to stretch. So it's stretching the buttons all the way across. Maybe we decrease the amount of gap in between them. Great, it's looking pretty good. And then all we need to do is go down to our mobile version and adjust our picture again. So maybe we'll adjust that down quite a bit. Maybe not that much. Somewhere around there. This rounding is getting to be quite a bit. So we can go over here and we can adjust our rounding back out on the top left, as well as this design is kind of getting out of control. So what we can do for the actual design is we can take that and decrease the max width on it to about 50%. So now as we scale up and down, maybe I went a little bit too much on the height property. And we can adjust this. Now you can sit here and play with the different properties and kind of get this right. But one of the important things to do is to kind of go back and forth like this just to see, what does it look like when it goes down. Now, I usually don't go below the 320 pixels because most people's phones are not any smaller than that. But, somewhere right in here, the 360 to 380 is like the good sweet spot really to think through. So that's kind of where I try to stick and see what does that look like. The next thing we need to do is really take our heading into consideration. It's pretty huge for mobile. And if we go back up and we check that on iPad, it's not too bad. If we check that on mobile landscape, it's starting to get quite big. And because we have given it a class, all we need to do is go over here to our typography and our sizing and just decrease that. Maybe we want to go down to, say, let's just go down to 2.5 rem. If you were using a style guide, you would have probably already made these decisions and you just are applying a different class here for that. But for our purposes, that's not what we're doing here today. And then when we get down to our mobile, maybe I want that to be a little bit smaller, say like 2.25 rem. So that looks pretty good. So if we go back up here, we can see that, these compare pretty well to what we have above. Now, slight differences in the way the buttons look, but as far as just the layout goes, and if we click on the eyeball button, we can begin to move this down through the different breakpoints just to see how it is going to respond. And indeed, it responds in a mobile responsive way. So no one would really have trouble, viewing this, whether they be on a desktop or whether they be on their mobile phone. And that's exactly what we want to take place. All right, well, that's how we build a 2-column layout in Webflow, utilizing position absolute for some of the different elements on the screen, as well as making that mobile responsive. If you got some value out of this video, would you smash that like button for me? And if you want more videos and tutorials like this, subscribe to the channel. I'm putting out videos every week where I'm teaching you web design and Webflow, one video at a time here on YouTube. Look forward to seeing you next time.